Now, Somerville is an amazing place with an amazing history. It even played a distinguished role in the American Revolution, right?
That's right. We were in the epicenter of, as I say, in the birth of this nation. You know, from being part of the Freedom Trail and Paul Revere's ride to the raising, as we celebrate every January 1st, of the Grand Union flag, the first flag of the United Colonies on Prospect Hill, which was raised January 1st, 1776. So we love to reenact that. But so we celebrate our historic roots in Somerville.
So what were some of the industries that came out in the 19th century?
Some of the famous ones in Somerville were you know, brick making. You know, companies like Spalding Brick, which were in existence even up until recently, or you know, the meat packing industry in the Somerville and the Cambridge line. In fact, my family, which immigrated here in the late 50s, all worked in those meat packing companies.
And then, of course, in 1926, Ford Motor Company came to Somerville in Assembly Square. Right?
Absolutely, the famous assembly plant, Ford Assembly Plant in Assembly Square, which assembled the Edsel up until the late 50s in Somerville,
That's
Massachusetts.
a great legacy.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
But like most American industrial cities, that didn't necessarily, you know, augur well in the post-war environment, right? So your population hit its maximum in 1950 with slightly over 100,000.
Yeah, I think we were about 110,000. We were at one point the most densely populated city in the U.S. and one of the most densely populated in the world.
One of the things that's interesting about Somerville's density, though, is its density without skyscrapers, right? It was density with triple deckers packed in close to each other.
The overwhelming majority of the housing stock are 2- and 3-family homes. Right. I grew up in one of those 3-family homes.
Right. Now, from the 50s to the 70s was the period of decline, right? It was
Yeah.
the period where the industry had left and the city was becoming less attractive.
Sure. Somerville started to garner this new reputation. There was a word that rhymes with Somerville. We don't repeat it anymore.
We won't repeat it either. You can look it up on
But it's an
the
interesting
internet,
time period because the mid-century is when when the automobile became king. So they started to redefine our business districts. Those districts, such as Union Square, was more dense in the early 1900s than it is today. We're no longer defined by that form of mobility.
And the factories moved away from the older form of transportation to the newer one, to the
Absolutely.
car on the urban edge, right?
Absolutely, it changed. It started to change the neighborhoods, and you know, somewhat the fabric of the community, but the reputation is. But the social strength of the community was always robust.
And how did that social fabric show itself in the city's comeback? How did that
Yeah,
matter?
I think it really started in the early 70s. You know, I would say declines of cities happen a lot quicker than the turnarounds.
Right.
In 1970s, we elected a new mayor. His name was S. Lester Ralph, and he's still alive today, minister, who was a reform mayor. And I always say the Boston Globe Spotlight got their name in Somerville because he came in and opened up the books, but started to really promote social activism. You know, the community coming out to own its future, participate in its future.
You've done a number of very high-profile projects in Somerville, but there are unique features of them, right? One always gets the sense that your projects are not about the structures for the structure's sake, but because they bring something to the human fabric of Somerville. Right. So can you talk a little bit about your philosophy and just give some examples of whether it's Assembly Square or other areas where you think the projects really worked and achieved something good?
It comes back to people. I think my planning director, George Proica, stated it perfectly. I think he did this at a TEDx conference too. He said, if we plan a city for cars, that's what we're going to get. If we plan it for people, that's what will benefit. And we want neighborhoods that are happy, healthy, productive, robust, with thriving sidewalk life and activity.
Well, what does that mean for the physical design of Assembly Square?
Well, we wanted to make sure if you go to Assembly, you'll see a particular approach called Somerville by Design, a community-based visioning and planning approach we use, where we encourage a certain block size. You know, we leverage density around the transit nodes. You see a lot of active streetscapes. You know, the buildings don't have a lot of dead walls, and we don't create dead space. You can create incredible open space that nobody uses.
Right.
This long linear path with nothing happening. But how do we encourage and establish a sense of place? You know, what are the physical attributes to that, and what are the other activities to that? Maybe it's not a physical feature, but maybe the space is used for certain activities. We promote certain cultural events, civic events.
And there's a ton of that
and
in Assembly Square, right?
Absolutely, huge. I mean, there's an amphitheater. We promote events with the arts along the river, and that's what, you know, really builds community at the end of the day.
And how does that get paid for?
Well, places like Assembly, I think a good example of where the public and private realm, public and private sector come together. Excuse me. We had you make that happen with a community's vision and plan. And then you create the zoning, the rules to allow that plan to be executed. But there are other critical components as well. You need a private sector partner who can help execute that plan. We have that in Assembly and Federal Realty Investment Trust. You have the Commonwealth and the federal government will help make investments in infrastructure, but the infrastructure piece is also huge. But just to create a neighborhood where one never existed before, it's not easy. There was an activist group, still is in Somerville, called the Mystic View Task Force. They challenged us. They challenged me that we need to dream and think bigger of the city, because as a group of people in the city, they said, and they were correct, this is one of our last frontiers. Somerville doesn't have a lot of land, right, and we needed to have a long-term paradigm shift in the tax base. We needed more commercial tax revenue for the city in the future, done the right way. Development that was good and robust, that promoted the human skill, but that it also allowed us to provide the services in our schools and public safety and other city services in the long term. And otherwise, Somerville was really a majority bedroom community. So they challenged us not to think about just big box stores, you know, to leverage density in the right way. And we had a lot of battles on this. We went to court on this. That was one of the most important lessons of leadership for me, and looking back on it and understanding where I failed as a leader, and then how to turn that around, and how you leverage community empowerment for the greater good. I think there was one lesson. It was Assembly Square.
So this is, I mean, one of the things that's remarkable, and it fits with the broader themes of this course, is that mid-20th century public development meant that there was a great man, a Robert Moses, and Ed Logue in charge, and, you know, community be damned, he was going to push through his vision of what worked. And then community groups came together, like in Washington Square Park in New York, and they said no. And we, in the post-Washington Square Park world, we've got a lot of community groups that are good at saying no throughout the world. What's remarkable about your Somerville story is that you managed to get the community groups to be involved, but also to say yes.
Yeah.
And how does that happen? How do you get from the natural NIMBYism, the fear of change that is so common in community groups and development, into saying yes to something that's grander, that's better?
You know, I found that we, and myself included, have often described it as a not my backyard or NIMBYism or fear of change. I think change, we all fear change. The question is, you know, it's more of a question of social equity and progress. And the concern for people is who will participate in defining that future of that neighborhood or the city? Who will have the opportunity for the jobs of that new industry? How will the local small businesses benefit or profit as well? Will I have an authentic choice to actually live here, or my kids to be part of this community after this project is built out? And those are the questions we have to have empathy for. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we got people to say yes. I think we all had to say yes. It wasn't trying to convince those unopposed to how we were approaching the project, say yes, but how do we come to a common ground together? And that's becoming better listeners